Forgiveness with a narcissist is very tricky business. It's not my place to sit here and tell you whether you should or should not forgive. That's a very personal process. But with a narcissistic person, I say you have to forgive with realistic expectations. You need to understand that when you forgive them, they may very, very well turn around and do the same thing again. So let's talk a little bit about what I mean by authentic forgiveness. When we think about forgiveness, it's a fraught space in these relationships. Most of what we read about forgiveness is that forgiveness is always good. It's great. It heals people. It heals countries. It heals cities. It heals everyone. What if you forgive someone who repeatedly does bad, betraying things to you, and they keep doing bad and betraying things to you? How many times are we expected to forgive? Do we keep taking the punches and falling back on the idea that forgiveness is virtuous? How are we supposed to forgive if there are no consequences for the person who keeps harming us? These are tough questions. And these issues don't come up as much when forgiveness is related to a situation that doesn't involve toxic personality styles. But sometimes people say they forgive, but they don't really. It almost becomes a sort of performative forgiveness. But when forgiveness is not authentic, it can actually do more harm than good. And there may be people around you saying, "Look at me, I'm a forgiver, why can't you forgive them?" But did they actually even really forgive someone? Authentic forgiveness doesn't mean you just forgive. It means you engage in a process that is not mandated or scheduled. It means that you put your healing first and work on feeling whole and safe again. It means you hold space for you and your identity. It may not even look like forgiveness to other people. For example, as part of your process, you may decide to no longer speak to someone because it feels healthier for you. And as a result of that, you start feeling more whole again, healthier again, and find that you're able to let go of some of the resentment. However, others looking at you from the outside in may say, "Why are you giving them such a hard time? Why are you being so hard-headed?" As though you are the problem for disengaging. But this process of setting a boundary and giving yourself space at a certain time, not punitively, but to just heal, could be a part of authentic forgiveness that doesn't look like forgiveness. For some reason, we have allowed the concept of forgiveness in our culture to become conflated with being a punching bag and a doormat. We position forgiveness as a gift for the other, with little regard for what forgiving does to the forgiver. And I got a video coming up on that too. Again, this forgiveness thing is what I've been thinking about a lot this month. Now, authentic forgiveness is about the process and not the destination. It's about working on you, setting boundaries, deciding if you will forgive or not, understanding that you don't ever have to, whether or not you'll even tell the person you forgive them. It's not performative so that you can prance about and tell everyone you forgave when you didn't. It's an honest reckoning on whether you truly believe you can let go of the resentment. I think that a lot of people do over time, especially if they can get distance from the narcissistic person, but sometimes it takes a really long time. I don't view forgiving people as virtuous, and I view false forgivers who have no problem shaming others as actually being quite dangerous. Keep it real. Forgiveness in and of itself is not the goal, but you finding yourself again, giving permission to yourself again, in the midst of repeated betrayals and meannesses and invalidations and cruelty. What you do with that, it's up to you. The authenticity of the process is more about how you work this out for yourself and not doing something that just lets everyone else feel better about the situation. That's what makes it authentic forgiveness. In authentic forgiveness, you may never actually forgive, but you're simply going to allow yourself to let the process unwind and see how you feel as time goes on. So today I'm going to take on in this video this idea of avoiding pseudo-forgiveness. So, this is an interesting kind of a tricky topic, this idea of sort of pseudo-forgiveness, and ideally avoiding it. Forgiveness is already a complex topic in and of itself, but understanding forgiveness within the context of narcissistic relationships is a mess. The challenge is that we want forgiveness to be simple. I forgive you, and good people forgive, and now things will be better, and I feel better about myself because I forgave them. So what happens when you forgive a person and they hurt you again and again and again? And you keep forgiving, maybe because it feels like it's the right thing to do, maybe it feels virtuous, maybe you feel pressure to do it. Maybe it's part of the religious teachings you heard or grown up with or believe. From a straight-up dictionary perspective, forgiveness is defined as to cease to feel resentment towards an offender. To cease to feel resentment. So by that definition, it means every time you forgive, you're supposed to cease to feel resentment. Do you? Do you cease to feel resentment every time you forgive? Your partner cheats, you forgive. They end up leaving you and getting engaged to their cheating person. Do you stop resenting them, even though you forgave them? Your business partner makes a mess of the books, and you lose a big part of your life's work and the investment you made after they lied to you and gaslighted you. Let's say you forgive them. Do you really stop resenting them? You keep forgiving a narcissistic partner. They gaslight, they manipulate, they run hot, they run cold, they run up, they run down, but you keep forgiving. You are left with a sense of anxiety, not being enough, and rumination. Do you stop resenting them? You stepped up and cared for your narcissistic parent for years. You endured their abuse, and as they get their financial affairs in order, despite you losing some earning potential from caring for them, they still give a bunch of money to the golden child sibling who has never helped and doesn't really need the money. And that money could have been used to get a carer or a cleaner into the house to lighten your caregiving burden. Do you really stop resenting? Listen, who am I to? I don't know. Maybe you did stop resenting, which means that you're a lot more flexible and nice than I am. But I think that many, if not most of us, don't stop resenting, especially when we're chronically put through the sort of same kinds of wrongdoing. We may let it go. We may move on. We may grieve the marriage. We may get back on our feet professionally or downsize our lives. We may just shrug and feel that our duty was to care for the parent and we were never doing it for the money. But you may still resent it. Even though you forgave, you may still resent. Is that forgiveness? Forgiveness is so virtuous that we look warmly on people who do it. But I get to have the deep, dark conversations with people who say, yeah, I told them or I told the world I forgave them. And it feels good to have the world tell me, you really are the bigger person here. But then they'll tell me, in the privacy of our conversation, they'll say, I have to own it. I don't really forgive this person. To which my response is typically, then maybe you need to stop telling the world that you do forgive them. Because it creates an incongruence and a tension within us, a discomfort in us when we claim to forgive someone, but we really don't. The pressure to forgive by the world is so high. The validation we get is often so admiring that it pushes folks into this pseudo-forgiveness. It's not good. It's like lying to ourselves and having to experience the inconsistency of the world believing we forgave, the narcissistic person believing that we forgave them, but in our hearts knowing that we really didn't. This can doubly sting if the narcissistic person behaves badly again, because then we are left holding the bag of having publicly forgiven, not internally forgiven, feel betrayed again, but honestly, sometimes that second or third or fourth time they hurt us or betray us can be a place where you might say, oh, hell no, I don't forgive you again. If I can only give you one recommendation in these relationships, don't pseudo-forgive. It's not good for you. I understand the pressure to forgive. I do. But on top of all of the cognitive dissonance you've been living with for so long, the pseudo-forgiveness takes a toll. The hard work of survivorship from these relationships is to not succumb to the pressure to forgive. Do it, don't do it, that's up to you, but get yourself sorted first. Feel whole first. Forgiving isn't necessary for that process within you. Narcissistic forgiveness is different than healthy forgiveness. In narcissistic forgiveness, you may end up enabling them. It can leave you stuck in a trauma-bonded cycle, and you keep enduring their hurtful behavior. Healthy forgiveness results in change and growth. But keep it real. Being in narcissistic relationships often means lying to ourselves all the time. Don't let forgiveness be another place that happens. What's another reason we often forget that forgiveness is so hard in a narcissistic relationship? So, again, the Forgiveness Month in my healing program has been actually very profound for me as the person who's creating the content and the curriculum. And I think it's really been a really important series of revelations for the people in the program. But I've been thinking about it, and it's just sort of coming up in lots of places I look. I was watching a news report a while ago. A person's family member had sort of been a victim of a crime. A trial happened, and the person who committed the crime against that person's family member was sentenced. The person whose family member was the victim of the crime said that she forgave the perpetrator. I shook my head as I watched this news coverage. I could see the pain in this woman's face. I could see the grief, the loss. It was her process, maybe part of her spiritual space to forgive, and I respect that. But I thought for a minute, and I know me. If I had seen someone terribly harmed due to a crime or an avoidable accident, I don't think I could forgive. And that was me. So it really engrossed me in what this woman's experience was. And it really made me think a lot about forgiveness, especially this month because I'm talking about it in this program. And while I still don't think I could forgive somebody who harmed my family member, even if they were sentenced or incarcerated forever, it gave me an important insight into why forgiveness is so tricky in narcissistic relationships. Listen, what's happening in most narcissistic relationships aren't crimes and such clear-cut circumstances. 99% of the time, the stuff that goes down in a narcissistic relationship is more subtle. And it dawned on me. I realized that narcissistic people almost never face consequences for their behavior. Lots of people enable them and say things like, it takes two to tango, he can't help it, he doesn't have a filter, she doesn't mean it, their bark is worse than their bite, she had a tough childhood, oh come on now, he apologized, you know the whole drill. And most people will often take the stance of, oh come on now, let it go, relationships are tough, you need to turn the other cheek, take the high road, be the better person. The downstream effect of all of this is that narcissistic people rarely face consequences in their relationships, families, or workplaces. And that makes all of this stuff, especially this forgiveness stuff, a lot harder. I do think that if a narcissistic person faced real consequences when they do something bad, whatever those consequences may look like, lose a job, go to jail, get a big fine, lose their reputation, lose something that matters to them, have people turn their backs on them, and let's say that kind of thing happened to them early and often. Conceivably, that could shape their behavior. Consequences shape behavior. We know that. But since most people with these personality styles rarely face consequences, they almost become emboldened and may even push the envelope and do worse and worse things because there aren't any consequences. But in the absence of them facing consequences, it makes it even more difficult to forgive. Because not only could they do a bad thing, betray you or harm other people, and have nothing in their lives change, now you may be facing pressure to forgive or may feel you need to forgive. It doesn't feel good to forgive under those circumstances because it can feel like they got away with it 3 times. They got to do the bad thing, they didn't face any consequences, and now you are expected to forgive them, which is basically saying, yo, no problem, I'm cool, it's all good, I can let it go. So it's like there are no consequences, and the implicit message is that no matter what a person with a narcissistic personality does, they get away with it. Because with some, but not all narcissistic people, but I would say most, ultimately, believe it or not, there are actually consequences. They harass someone at work, they finally get called out. They keep playing it fast and loose with some financial thing, and they end up getting a big fine. They cheat on someone and get caught, and it's on camera and gets posted, and everyone sees it, and they are shamed, and this time the spouse leaves. They get caught on a hot mic saying despicable things, and it gets into the news, and they lose their position as a leader, a politician, or a celebrity. But here's the rub. When a narcissistic person finally gets caught, it likely means that they have done whatever the bad things are doing dozens and dozens and dozens of times before. This time, it finally gets seen. It also means they have done it dozens and dozens and dozens of times before, and this may be the first time that there are consequences. They will yammer on about witch hunts and having a target on their back and they're a victim, blah, blah, blah. When they do face consequences, you may still feel hurt from whatever they did to you, but we do feel a little more stable, a little more whole when there feels like there was a real consequence. In some cases, you may even pity them, but that's a bit more of a trauma bond thing. And in some cases, if forgiveness is what you need to do, them having faced a consequence may actually make it a little bit easier for you to forgive. Forgiveness, as I said, and I've been thinking about all month, is very tricky territory in narcissistic relationships. There's no 2 ways about it. They view forgiveness as permission, basically. But always remember that the lack of consequences that most people who are narcissistic face, their ability to commit their bad behaviors right under the line or behind closed doors where no one can see it, and yet it harms you so much, can make it really hard to forgive. But it did dawn on me that idea that to forgive someone after some other entity has placed consequences on them, I'm not saying at all that it's easy, but it may feel like it's more possible. But if you see somebody who's constantly betraying you, harming you, insulting you, whatever it may be, they never face a consequence, and you find yourself in this really uncomfortable position of constantly forgiving, that lack of consequence is one more reason, like we need one more, but one more reason that forgiveness is so difficult in these relationships. When you forgive a healthy human being, you have given them really what can only be called a sacred gift. You have given them an opportunity to change their behavior and keep them in your heart. And a healthy person, when they receive forgiveness, sees it as the divine state it's in, changes that behavior, and it's an opportunity for that relationship to move forward. We all make mistakes, all of us. But healthy people recognize those mistakes, apologize for those errors, check in with the person they hurt, and then the person who was hurt has the opportunity, if they so choose, to offer forgiveness. It all seems very nice and tidy and neat, and it works great. There's good research out there showing us that forgiveness is a healthy and important state. But now let's jump the rails to what happens when you forgive a narcissist. not so healthy. Because when we forgive people, we have certain expectations. We expect that they will hear us, that they will recognize our hurt, and most importantly, that they will make the changes they need to make so they don't repeat it again. Think about how it feels when you forgive someone for a transgression of any kind. They've lied to you, they've cheated on you, they've taken money from you, they've harmed something that matters to you, they've betrayed your trust in some way, they've hurt you. When you forgive under those conditions, you expect, you hope at least, that that's going to turn into meaningful behavioral change. If you keep forgiving someone and they keep making the same mistake, that basically makes you not just a sucker, but someone who's actually getting harmed by these repeated episodes of having your trust betrayed. What happens when one person keeps betraying your forgiveness? Everyone in your world loses out because it cheapens what forgiveness is. And that's exactly what narcissistic people tend to do with forgiveness. Narcissistic people don't necessarily set out to do bad things. They're not psychopaths. They're not malignant, all of them, in that way. A lot of them do the wrong thing because they don't think. They're just self-serving. They impulsively do the thing that feels right in the moment. They make messes and clean them up later. And that mess may be in your own life. So what ends up happening is it leaves you in the position of being with a person who's very self-serving, very insensitive, says what's on their mind. They'll often say, I have no filter. That's one of their favorite things to say. And that's how they sort of try to rationalize that. And then you may forgive them, thinking like, okay, they see that they've hurt. And the narcissist may even say, gosh, that wasn't a very nice thing to do. I'm really, really sorry. So you forgive them. And then they turn around and they do it again. And they're like, oh, I can't help myself. You better learn to help yourself, should be the response. When you give a narcissist forgiveness, they view it as permission. They don't view it as an opportunity to change their behavior in a meaningful way. They may change their behavior in the short term for a little while. They may not make that mistake for a few weeks or even a few months, but they will make it again, especially if it relates to their entitlement, their impulsivity, their arrogance, and their need to get narcissistic supply. It's almost like they say they can't help themselves, but they're not delusional. This isn't dementia. They can help themselves. They're choosing not to, because that choice at the moment is uncomfortable. And they never do the uncomfortable thing, even if doing the uncomfortable thing, keeping their mouths shut, could keep them from hurting someone else. Again, make messes and clean them up later. Because so many people have jumped on the forgiveness bandwagon, it's really, really easy for people to sort of fall into that mess of feeling like, I gotta forgive. And in fact, a lot of people get gaslighted about forgiveness. Let's say you're in a relationship with a narcissist and you keep forgiving them over and over and over again, and they keep doing the same mistakes over and over and over again. One day you said, I am not forgiving them anymore. And people in your family are like, oh, come on now, turn the other cheek, forgiveness is divine, and on and on and on. And you may feel that pressure from outside of you to forgive someone, to be a good Christian, to be a good whatever faith you follow, because that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to forgive. It cheapens the entire experience of forgiveness, because then you're like, oh, I'm handing out forgiveness like I'm handing out like little coupons. It doesn't matter anymore. The whole thing becomes devalued. But it does matter, because forgiveness is indeed a very, very high divine state. One where you expect that I have allowed myself to put this down, to let this go, even though you fundamentally hurt me, because I believe in you and I believe you've learned from this. If a person hasn't learned from this, then why are you forgiving them? Be very careful that you catch yourself, that you don't succumb to forgiveness pressure. Because again, what narcissists do with forgiveness is they treat it as permission. They don't change their behavior. They heave a sigh of relief. Maybe they don't go so far as to say, I got away with that, but I'm off the hook for now. Narcissists are very shame-driven. They don't like to be judged by the world. They're very uncomfortable by that because it cuts at their core insecurity. Forgiveness helps them with that uncomfortable feeling of shame because like they're like, "Woo, look, I'm not bad. Everything's fine. Everyone's saying everything's fine." And it actually plays into their whole dynamic of denial. That never happened. That never happened. If you forgive, for them, they view it as literally taking an eraser across a whiteboard and whoop, clearing it all away like it didn't happen. But it did happen. Forgiveness doesn't mean you forget. And in fact, I'm going to take a moment and read from my own personal high and mighty book and read to you from my book where I included a couple of quotes from Desmond Tutu. I think these quotes are important for us to consider when we think about forgiveness to a narcissist. One thing he said is, forgiving is not forgetting. It's actually remembering. Remembering and not using your right to hit back. It's a second chance for a new beginning. And the remembering part is particularly important, especially if you don't want to repeat what happened. Once a narcissist betrays your trust, especially if it happens multiple times, but once they've betrayed your trust, once they've hurt you, or hurt someone you care about, or hurt something you care about, or deceived you, or manipulated you, it happened. And you've got to remember it. You can't just naively keep throwing yourself into it thinking, oh, this time it's going to be different. It's not. Now you know what their landscape is. So if you're going to forgive, you've got to forgive and remember. Remember that there's quite a bit of possibility that also this could happen again. But Desmond Tutu goes on to say, once you've been able to forgive, the final step is to either renew or release the relationship you have with the one who has harmed you. Indeed, even if you never speak to the person again, even if you never see them again, even if they are dead, they live on in ways that affect you profoundly. I think the key in that statement is to renew, or more importantly, release the relationship with the one who has harmed you. Now, Tutu holds the view that you can forgive in any relationship. I suppose you can, but then he's also giving you permission to release that relationship. And here's where it gets interesting. To a narcissist, it ain't going to work for them if you forgive them and then you release them and let them go from your life. They're going to say, what? You forgave me. That means everything goes back to the way it was. It may very well be that the reason you can forgive them is because now you're taking the step of protecting yourself and walking away from this relationship. That math ain't going to add up for a narcissist. I can promise you that right now. They're going to say, well, then this isn't forgiveness. This isn't forgiveness because forgiveness means we go back to how things were. There's no going back. And that's the piece a narcissistic individual cannot understand, that there is no going back. The landscape has changed. The trust has been breached. They can't understand you can't go back to the way it was before the betrayal. They're so accustomed to betraying people and just not being there for people and not using their empathy with people that they just assume, again, they can make messes and clean them up. The eraser on the whiteboard. But you may very well say, I forgive you. I see what this was about, and now it's time for me to go. Like I said, that ain't going to work. Forgiveness with a narcissist is very tricky business. It's not my place to sit here and tell you whether you should or should not forgive. That's a very personal process. But with a narcissistic person, I say you have to forgive with realistic expectations. You need to understand that when you forgive them, they may very, very well turn around and do the same thing again. If forgiving them is for yourself, then that's on you. But if you're forgiving them with the condition in your mind that they're going to change their behavior, you will be hurt again. Narcissistic forgiveness is actually a very limited space. It's something you do for yourself, but that gives you sort of this limited return because you are going to get hurt in the same way over and over and over again. It's in this way, I actually get into this in both of my books, is this idea, are you really engaging in forgiveness or letting go? Letting go is when you say, this happened, I don't forgive now. I'm not signing off on this. I am not okay with this, but I can't spend the rest of my life ruminating about this. This isn't good for me, so I'm going to let it go. But now I know what this person is capable of. Not so sure that that's forgiveness as much as letting go. But keep in mind too, forgiveness can happen alongside letting go of a relationship completely. As Tutu put it, releasing a relationship. If you remember always that when you forgive a narcissist, they're viewing it as permission, and not permission to make a better second start, but to keep business as usual. If you can remember that, then you can remember, do I really want to forgive this behavior? Narcissistic individuals will often gaslight you if you don't forgive them, or they will demean you and say, you're a very petty person, you're a very small person. They may again pull that whole idea of faith out. You're not a good whatever religion you are. You're a smaller person than me, etc., etc., etc. They will really, really drill into you. And if the other people around you are drilling into you too, family members, friends, it can be a really, really lonely place to find yourself. You don't owe your forgiveness to anyone. It's a personal process. You may not get there for years. You may not get there for 50 years. You may not ever get there. Your forgiveness may only come after that person passes. It is very, very personal. I often tell people, be very careful who you talk to about forgiveness, especially with a narcissist. There is so much sort of societal messaging around that. It can be very hard to hold your space and say, I don't forgive this. It can be very hard because for some people, they feel that no one understands the pain of narcissistic abuse. And I got to be honest with you, a lot of people don't. It's something that even in the field of mental health is just sort of a newly evolving area that a lot of therapists don't know about. And a lot of people out there won't even know what you're talking about. But narcissistic abuse and narcissistic alienation can do such a number on you that you feel wrecked. You've given up dreams. You've given up years of your life. Your health has suffered. Your mental health has suffered. That may not be something you're ready to forgive. And I'm here. This video is a place to say, you have permission to not. Perhaps that day will come, and I hope it for everyone, when you have that clarity, where you're living life in your meaning, your purpose. You have found things that matter to you. You're no longer living in rumination. And while the scars will always be there, you slowly become indifferent to the experience you had with the narcissist. Maybe that's forgiveness, where you just stop caring about it. You don't care if they succeed, you don't care if they fail, you just don't care. And that might be as close to forgiveness, healthy forgiveness, as a person can get with a narcissist. So again, think about it. It's a very, very heavy topic, and I know that. But I hope this gives you some food for thought, and also gives you some permission that you feel like you do not have to forgive on anyone else's schedule. The way narcissists receive forgiveness is very complicated and can be very painful. You can give that gift when you're ready, and only if you're ready. And you may decide it's not a gift you want to give to this narcissistic person ever again. So I read something the other day, and it said forgiveness benefits the forgiver. So this idea of forgiveness benefits the forgiver, I don't know. Maybe it is true in relationships that are not characterized by narcissism and antagonism. But I must say that in these relationships, narcissistic relationships, forgiveness does not benefit the forgiver. It absolutely does benefit the forgiven. The research on forgiveness consistently says that it's good for us, and it fosters relationships and community healing and lots of good stuff. And in my experience, if the person receiving the forgiveness receives it as the benediction that it is, and it changes their behavior and results in things like a genuine apology, and the people affected by all of this move forward with that recognition, I absolutely agree that forgiveness benefits the forgiver. The problem is that we view forgiveness as a one-size-fits-all. It's always good, right? And so as a result, we don't see how potentially harmful this can be for people in narcissistic relationships, where it doesn't go down the way, forgiveness doesn't go down the way it does in healthy relationships. In these cases, in the long term, the forgiveness not only does not benefit the forgiver, it can potentially harm them. Because to keep forgiving and then being betrayed despite forgiving can do some real harm to a person and not only undercut the ability to trust, but also to heal and can result in feelings like self-blame and shame. But the struggle is this. When all these feel-good platitudes like forgiveness benefits the forgiver that people may see in places of worship or on Instagram or at feel-good retreats, that forgiveness is good for you. And so it follows that if you do not forgive, then you're not doing something that's supposed to be good for you, right? And oh, that person who is forgiven, it's not about them. I've been saying this repeatedly this month, again, so I'm not going to belabor it here, but the entitlement of narcissistic personality styles is such that they feel entitled to forgiveness. They believe they deserve the forgiveness. They already feel entitled to their own behavior. And because this personality style is focused on what looks good to the world, if they can log that you forgave them, well then they can brag about that to the world. Look at us, aren't we great? They forgave me, we're so good. They sort of treat forgiveness as, again, the proverbial get out of jail free card. And that's not so good. And no, that entire dynamic does not benefit you. The challenge is that so much of the relationship advice out there, the communication advice, the self-help stuff, hell, even the mental health stuff, does not account for the impact of antagonistic, manipulative personality styles. So I don't disagree. Forgiveness in and of itself is not a bad thing. But if you are able to get comfortable with someone consistently betraying your trust, despite your apologizing to them, I can promise you that in the long run, that is not good for you. So, yeah, maybe forgiveness is good for the forgiver in the case of non-narcissistic relationships, but for people in these relationships, the forgiveness can really, really take a toll. But I must say, forgiveness is a really polarizing topic. Now, don't get me wrong. I am not anti-forgiveness. I know some of the virtues of forgiveness in healthy relationships. I think it can be a key space of growth. However, I see little to no virtue, and in fact, even some harm of forgiveness in narcissistic relationships. So some folks brought a little quote they saw on Instagram recently to my attention. And the quote was something like, forgiving a person who doesn't say sorry is strength, or that it's strong to forgive someone who doesn't say sorry. Is it? Yeah, drop that in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. There was actually once a quote, I think attributed to Gandhi, that goes, "The weak can never forgive. Forgiveness is an attribute of the strong." So I think that this Instagram was really a riff off of Gandhi. I don't care how this quote is said. I don't agree. A narcissistic relationship is a lifetime or a decade or however how long the relationship goes of never really being apologized to or being apologized to in a BS way. I'm sorry you feel that way. If a person keeps forgiving that kind of thing, is that strong or is that just masochism? It takes the concept of forgiveness and it waters it down. It turns it into some performative divine action a person undertakes to make the world feel better to them. It enables a toxic person, and it keeps a sick status quo stuck where it is. All of this grandstanding around forgiveness, that somehow we are better if we forgive, is something I call forgiveness arrogance. Look how good I am. I forgave them. It's not so good. If the person being forgiven views that forgiveness as a permission to keep doing their bad things, we know that when you forgive a narcissistic person, not only does it not change their behavior, they also view it almost as a weakness, that you are the sucker that they can keep playing. Remaining stoic in the face of that, is that actually strength? I don't know about that. We make a big mistake in our society that enduring toxic behavior, cruelty, and meanness without flinching, without anger, frankly, without emotion, is somehow strong. It's not. It is a silencing of ourselves, a silencing of our authenticity, a silencing of our damn truth. I bet if I got the people who believe in that whack quote into a room, they'd say, "Oh, Dr. Ramani, we don't mean that. We mean that we can be better and try to understand the other person and forgive them because they are so lost." I know about that. Narcissistic people don't seem that lost. They know when to turn it on. They know when they can get away with stuff, how to manipulate, how to gaslight, how to get their way, how to intimidate other people, how to bully. That does not feel lost to me. It feels very calculated and cunning. The folks who champion a quote like this would say, "Oh, but we don't mean it if a person keeps doing this." You can't have exceptions in quotes. You're kind of all in on these things. But that's the thing. The people who don't say sorry, they keep not saying sorry. How long is a person supposed to keep enduring and forgiving so an Instagram quote can tell them that they're strong? For too long, people in toxic relationships have been told to put up and shut up, to not be so needy, to not ask for so much, to not expect respect, to make compromise, to be the bigger person, to be more realistic, to try and understand the other person's point of view. Enough. This has to stop. We have to stop forgiving people who keep harming us. We have to stop forgiving the people who never show empathy. We have to stop forgiving the people who keep saying mean and cruel and hurtful things and lie and deceive and gaslight and who don't apologize or apologize as a way of saving face. You don't have to leave the relationship. You don't have to call them out, but you sure as hell don't have to forgive them. You can radically accept that their meanness and their arrogance and their antagonism is who they are and make your decisions accordingly, but you don't need to forgive them. Why is it okay that in a narcissistic relationship, the world expects just one person to carry the empathy burden? I shouldn't even call it a burden, the empathy bag, I guess. Oh, but that's just how they are. They just speak their mind. They're just difficult. They don't have a filter. Somehow, we have become okay with one group of people who must forever be relegated to doing all of the compassionate and empathic heavy lifting for the narcissistic people who refuse to do it. Somehow we have become okay with it. This is why the world is the mess that it is right now. And here is where I really don't like quotes like this. It's not said, but it's implied in this quote. If forgiving someone who doesn't say sorry is strong, does that mean that not forgiving them is weak? I don't think I'm allowed to curse on YouTube, so let's just say F you. To endure these relationships while often being gaslighted by the world, to be eternally confused and guilty and ashamed and self-blaming, that, my friends, is strength. Getting up to fight another day when you walk through the world feeling not enough, like an imposter, and fighting against the internalized, invalidating voices that plague you every minute of the day, folks, that is strength. And finally recognizing the mess of a narcissistic relationship for what it is and saying, I am no longer forgiving this person. They never took accountability. They never took responsibility. They hurt me repeatedly. That is unforgivable. That realization, that is strength. The world is a mess because we keep forgiving transgressions that are unforgivable. We shame people who don't want to forgive after years of being harmed. We call them weak. You want to forgive someone who keeps hurting you, who never changes and never takes accountability and never apologizes? Then you do you. The Instagram solace of feeling strong, I promise you this, it's going to wear away really fast. But if you say something is not forgivable, what this person did was not okay, you don't have to run up to them and say, I don't forgive you. That's something you can carry internally. That is not weakness. It is deep, radical acceptance. And that, from my point of view, if you can do that, is the greatest strength of all. Thanks again.